What Lonzo thinks is a wide-ranging, free-flowing discussion where I offer my unsolicited views on everything from music, movies, politics, sports, religion, pop culture, you name it. If it's happening, I'm talking about it. My thoughts are unsolicited. Nobody cares, but I care. And hopefully, if you listen, you'll care too. All right, and I am back. How you doing? Happy New Year. It is January 6th. So, I guess is it too late to say Happy New Year? When do you stop saying Happy New Year? Is there a cutoff period? Let's give it a week. So, Happy New Year. So, tomorrow is the last day that you can officially say Happy New Year to anyone. So, after the 7th, you got to keep it moving. It's kind of like you can't wear white after Labor Day. All right, college football. Uh, the end of the season is almost upon us. The big championship game has been set between Clemson and who are they playing? Good Lord, and LSU. Clemson and LSU will play in the national championship game. Two very deserving teams, two great teams, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a magnificent battle between two evenly matched squads. But I'm not here to talk about LSU and Clemson. I'm here to talk about the University of Georgia, my favorite team. My favorite college sports team is the University of Georgia football program. I've been an avid fan of Georgia football since 1976. I'm sorry, take that back. I'm lying. Since January 1st, 1977. That's when I saw my first game, my very first Georgia football game. I saw it on TV. They played against the Pittsburgh Panthers in the Sugar Bowl. That was the year that Pittsburgh went undefeated and won the national championship. And Tony Dorsett was their leader. He won the Heisman Trophy. He was obviously star running back for the Pittsburgh Panthers. And that was the first time I actually watched a college football game in its entirety on television, and I was hooked, and I became just an avid football fan from that game. And the thing is, I didn't know who Georgia was. I just saw the big G and the red, and I just kind of fell in love with them. But Tony Dorsett was the big star that day, and he led the team, like I said, with a couple touchdowns. And once again, we won the Heisman Trophy, and they won the national championship. And I was very impressed with Tony Dorsett. Didn't know who he was actually until that day, obviously. But just something about, I guess because I'm from Georgia. I live in the state of Georgia. I was in Warner Robins, Georgia, born and raised in Warner Robins, Georgia. And because I'm in Georgia, of course, I just became a huge Georgia fan. So I've seen every Georgia game since that day. So I'm a huge, huge, huge Georgia fan. I know the history, and like most rabid fans, I live and die with their every game. So I hold them to a very high standard. I'm a big sports fan, and I hold my sports team to a very high standard. Georgia won a national championship in 1980. That's a long time. Actually, they played Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl January 1st, 1981, and won the national championship. They went undefeated, led by one of the greatest football players of all time, college football players of all time, Herschel Walker. So, enough of that. I'm not going to go through the whole history of Georgia, but just a bit of a preface as I get into today's topic, which is I am going to review the 2019 Georgia football season. I am going to give a brief snapshot opinion of each game and then just wrap it up, just kind of like I would do my music reviews, my album reviews. I'm just reviewing the Georgia football season. Now, over the last 4 or 5 years, last 3 years, should I say, the University of Georgia football team has turned into one of the elite programs in all of college football. They are a juggernaut, a powerhouse, led by Coach Kirby Smart, who took over for Mark Richt approximately 4 years ago. And since then, he has turned this team into a power in the Southeastern Conference. Kirby is a Georgia alum. He played at University of Georgia. He was a defensive back. He coached though at Alabama for a long time. He coached at Georgia, and then he went to Alabama, where he was the top assistant to Nick Saban, arguably the greatest football coach ever. And he learned a lot from Nick Saban came to Georgia, and he's basically turned Georgia into Alabama East, which is not a bad thing. Georgia's been very competitive since Kirby got there. They made it to the national championship game a couple of years ago, of course, against Alabama, and lost in a heartbreaking fashion in overtime. Came back the next year, played Alabama again in the SEC championship game, and fell short against Alabama again. Georgia won the SEC championship the previous year against Auburn. Then the second year they went back and they lost to Alabama. They went back again this year and lost to LSU, who might be the eventual champion. There once again they play this next Monday, the 13th, against Clemson for the championship. So enough of that. So I'm going to get into it, and what I'll do is basically go through every game and give my brief snapshot opinion of each game and my thoughts about the Georgia team, how they played, and things of that nature. And I'll just kind of go from there. Oh, before I even get started, the top players for University of Georgia are the quarterback, Jake Fromm, who happens to be from my hometown, Warner Robins, Georgia, Boot Whoop. DeAndre Swift, their talented tailback. Jake Fromm is the quarterback. They have Lawrence Cager, who is a great wide receiver. J.R. Reed, who is a great defensive back. They also have Richard LeCount, who is also a great defensive back. So they have a slew of fast, talented, five-star recruits. Basically, at every position, the team is deep at every position. They're very talented, extremely talented. Definitely a top 5 program. And Kirby has worked hard to get this team, get this school, get the program to where it is, and the players as well. They all work hard. You can tell they all work hard. They're very talented, all of them. Every last player is very, very, very talented, and they make us all proud here here in the state of Georgia. All right. That being said, let's get into it. The first game of this season, of the 2019 season, was against Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt is one of the doormats of the SEC, and of course, it's rare that that teams start their season with a conference game. But Georgia did this year. They usually start off with a cupcake, but they basically did start with a cupcake. They played Vanderbilt, which once again is one of the doormats of the league. They blew them out 30-6. It was a pretty nondescript game. You knew it was not competitive from the very beginning. You knew going in that Georgia was going to win just by how much. And they came in, put their foot on their throats, and kicked their asses and coasted. Jake Fromm led the team with 156 yards passing and a touchdown. DeAndre Swift carried 16 times for 147 yards. And Lawrence Cager had a couple receptions for 41 yards. Once again, the game was unremarkable. A lot of the young players got to step up and show their skill. James Cook had a touchdown. Demetrius Robertson, who was a transfer from Cal, one of the top transfers. Brian Harrion, the backup tailback, also had a touchdown. So it was a consistent all-around performance by everyone involved. Once again, the game was pretty much non-competitive. That's all I really got to say about that. Next up was against Murray State. Of course, Murray State is definitely a cupcake team that I forget whatever conference they play in, but they're a lower level team. No threat whatsoever to win anything against anybody, especially against a team like Georgia. So it was a massive blowout. They actually Georgia won the game. Let's see, the score was 63-17, and once again it was never competitive. Jake Fromm led the team with 166 yards passing and 1 touchdown. Zamir White led the team in rushing with 72 yards. He's the backup, one of the backups for DeAndre Swift. DeAndre had 2 touchdowns for 67 yards. And in passing, George Pickens, a talented freshman, had 4 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown. And once again, the defense was very, very solid. And once again, the score was 42-7 at halftime. So they basically they beat the brakes off them in the first half and hit the brakes in the second half. Just coasted to a very, very easy victory. Really nothing else to say about that other than just a blowout that nobody did not expect. Next up, it was Arkansas State, and Georgia won that game, of course, 55-0. Oh, and by the way, Georgia was came into the season ranked number 3 in the nation, so they had a number 3 ranking, um, or number 4 ranking, should I say? No, no, they were number 3. Yeah, number 3. It really don't matter. They were ranked in the top 5. They blew out Arkansas State 55-0. This game was never in doubt. Once again, Arkansas State. I think they are from the Sun Belt Conference, one of the smaller conferences. Once again, it was just a beatdown game, 55-0. Jake Fromm had a big game, 279 yards, 3 touchdowns, and DeAndre Swift 9 carries, 76 yards. So it was all around team effort, easy blowout. Really, not too much to say other than that. So first 3 games, we have Vanderbilt, Murray State, and the university, should I say, Arkansas State University. 3 easy victories. Once again, these victories were uh, uh, not predicted because once again, just none of these teams were a threat. So my assessment after the first 3 games really there's really not much to assess other than the fact that they played, three um, 3 doormats. So you really can't really gauge much about how good a team is based on these types of games. They're basically just exhibition warm up type games. Um, Jake Fromm steady as usual. DeAndre Swift once again steady. Everybody just steady. Jake Fromm came into the season as one of the Heisman hopefuls, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and from his performance in the first 2 years as a freshman and as a sophomore, well deserved to be mentioned as one of the top quarterbacks in the nation. Now I'm gonna kind of not go on a tangent, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about Jake Fromm, and I guess as I go on, you'll hear more about my thoughts about Jake Fromm. One of the things I did notice after the first 3 games of the season, I started looking at Jake Fromm in a different light. Um, I'm such a huge Georgia fan. When they were winning 2 years ago and last year, um, I overlooked a lot of things when it came to his ability as a quarterback. Um, I just love the fact that they were winning and the fact that he's from my hometown didn't hurt. But I started to notice some things after the first 3 games. First of all, that he was not very mobile and his arm strength was suspect. So I actually went back and looked at some games from the previous years, especially the Alabama games, and noticed that uh, in the games that Georgia really had trouble and games that they lost, Jake would really struggle with his mobility, his ability to avoid the rush, and his ability to make throws in the tight windows against top competition. So that really started to raise some eyebrows for me, and I'll speak more later on. All right, next up, Notre Dame. Georgia and Notre Dame, they've only played 3 times in their histories, and Georgia has won every game. They beat Notre Dame to win the national championship back in 1981, 17-10. That's the game that Herschel Walker showed out and led them to the national championship. And 2 years ago, Georgia went up to South Bend, Indiana, and beat Notre Dame. I think the score was 20-19. I forget. But Jake led the team into a hostile environment up at Notre Dame and led them to a huge victory. And it was a home and home series that they've set up with Notre Dame. So Notre Dame came to Athens, Georgia this time, and this was a very, very um, highly anticipated game, and the whole state was abuzz. It was the first time Notre Dame coming to Athens, so it was huge because Notre Dame one of the premier programs in all the college sports, and to have the football team come in, it's a huge deal, and everybody treated it as such. I mean, the fanfare was. It was like a mini Super Bowl, to be honest with you. And the game, it didn't. It lived up to its expectations. Um, Notre Dame is a team that's always been kind of, especially over the last 15, 20 years, been kind of overhyped. They're not as good as people say they are. I think people base uh, their predictions of Notre Dame based on their uh, their reputation more than their actual skill level. Their players, even though they have very good players, have solid players, their players are not at the level of a Georgia or Alabama or Florida, Clemson, teams like that. They're just a cut below across the board. And going into this game, I really expected this game to be a blowout. for a number of different reasons. Georgia's defense is one of the best defenses in the country, and Notre Dame's overall team speed leaves a lot to be desired. And Notre Dame's best player as a quarterback name is Ian Book. He's pretty mobile. He's a gutsy type guy, but his skill level still not anything that's a real threat to Georgia. And this particular game, Georgia won 23-17, but the game was much closer than it should have been. Um, there were a lot of plays that were left on the field. Um, Now, I will say this much: Jake Fromm did come through when he need to come through with some big throws, some clutch play, as did the rest of the team. But the game was in doubt until the very end, and Georgia had to put up a huge defensive stand in order to win the game. And of course, everyone was elated, and I mean they treated this as if they just won the Super Bowl. I mean that's how big it was. But to me, that was a harbinger of bad things to come, and I'm gonna tell you why. Georgia's a top 5 elite college program. Okay, and this is the 4th game of the season, non-conference game. Every game is important, of course, but they reacted to this game like they just won the national championship, and I thought that was a bad thing. You hear the term every once in a while when it comes to sports. Like, say, for example, somebody like scores a touchdown and they get all berserk and turning flips and acting a damn ass in the end zone. You hear the term a lot of time from announcers, act like you've been there before. And that's one of the first thing that came to my mind when Georgia beat Notre Dame and acted like they just won the national championship. Act like you've been there before. This exact same team, Notre Dame, if they'd gone to Alabama, same result, the Alabama players and fans would have been like, okay, another win, let's move on to the next one. But here at Georgia, we had to like I said before, like we just won the national championship. And at that moment, that night, when at the end of that game, when I saw the reaction of everyone, I said to myself, there's no way this team's going to win a national championship because they feel like they just won it right now. They're not going to win anything. And that really pissed me off because this is a big-time program. Act like you've been there before. I know it's a big win and everything. Celebrate, that's fine. But acting like, once again, you just won a championship is just ridiculous. You didn't win anything. You won one game. And act like you've been there before. They didn't do that. And like I said, at that moment, I knew the season was lost. All right. And let's see, look at the stats here. In that game, Ian Book, Jake Fromm. Jake passed for 187 yards, 1 touchdown. DeAndre Swift rushed for 98 yards on the touchdown. So it definitely was a collective effort. Everyone played very well. Lawrence Cager had a huge catch from Jake for that one touchdown, which basically sealed the game for him. So it was a great all around game played for them. Not take away from their victory. It was a great game. They played very well, but the game should not have been as close as it was because Notre Dame was nowhere near at Georgia's level, and I think Georgia actually played down to the competition for this particular game. All right, next up, Tennessee. Georgia win 43-14. Once again, Tennessee is one of the powerhouse programs in the SEC, at least used to be. They're down on their luck for the last few years, so this game nowhere near as competitive as the games were in the past between these two rivals. Really not a whole lot to say about this particular game other than the fact that it was a freaking blowout. The game was never in doubt. Let's see here, Jake, 288 yards, 2 touchdowns. Brian Herrien led the team in rushing, 88 yards. DeAndre Swift, 72 yards and a touchdown. Other than that, once again, just a blowout. I think the first part of the first half, Georgia played down to the competition, but they turned it on in the second half and blew them out. Next up, oh boy, South Carolina. Good Lord. Boy. All right. South Carolina came in. South Carolina is one of the worst teams in the SEC. And they came in at the time, I think they were at 3-2. They hadn't really beaten anyone that was of any consequence. Their starting quarterback was out, got injured early in the game and was out. And they beat Georgia 20-17, and this was a horrendous game for the team, especially one Mr. Jake Fromm, who passed for 295 yards, a touchdown, and 3 interceptions. Two of the interceptions just inexplicable. DeAndre Swift rushed for 113 yards and a touchdown. The defense played well. The defense only gave up 13 points. South Carolina scored 20. The deciding score was a pick six thrown by Jake. And this is the game where everything kind of crystallized for me on Mr. Jake Fromm. This dude could not avoid the rush to save his life. Save his life. And the South Carolina defense, led by Will Muschamp, who used to be a coach at Georgia, actually played at Georgia. Their defensive game plan was very simple. Very simple. They stacked the run and just dared Jake to beat him with the pass. He couldn't do it. Could not do it. Couldn't throw in tight windows. Was inaccurate. He looked like a totally different person out there. They continually pressured him, got him off his spots, got him off his first read, and he looked like a deer in headlights this entire game, and it was embarrassing, just terrible, and it really pissed me off because Jake seemed unprepared for this game. That once again, like he didn't know what the hell he was doing out there, and it showed in this play. I'm thinking, did he not study? Did he party too hard? It was just an inexplicable game. And people always say, well, everybody's entitled to a bad game, so on and so forth. In college football, especially when playing against a lesser opponent, no, you're not entitled to a bad game. You win the games you're supposed to win. I understand, you're playing against an Auburn or Alabama or LSU, and you have a tough game or whatever. When you're playing against a totally inferior team, no, this game should have been over by halftime. Now, it's not all on Jake. He don't play defense. Well, once again, our defense played great. But just as a whole, the offense was very inconsistent. And Jake, as the leader of that offense, it all falls on him. A lot of folks made a lot of excuses about drop passes. There were drop passes. But once again, a lot of those passes that were dropped or tipped were inaccurate, which led to interceptions. And once again, the pick six that he threw was just inexplicable. And it just crystallized, a couple things. His arm strength is not there. He couldn't get it where he needed to get the ball. And the player from South Carolina, I think he threw interception to the same 3 interceptions to the same player. The South Carolina D-back, he made this guy look like it was Deion Sanders. It was just an embarrassing performance. 2017, South Carolina over Georgia, and this game pretty much ruined the season. Next up, Kentucky. Now, this was another terrible game for one Mr. Jake Fromm. It was rainy. It was wet. He passed for 35 yards and a QBR of 6. Oh, my God. DeAndre Swift won the game for the team with 179 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And once again, Kentucky, the Kentucky team, they were playing with a backup quarterback because their starting quarterback was hurt. And this game was scoreless at the halftime. Just an awful game. And it was rainy. It was wet. No excuses. Jake played awful in this game. Just awful. And DeAndre put the team on his back and led him to victory. So we got back-to-back just terrible games from one Mr. Jake Fromm. One a loss and one a win thanks to the efforts of DeAndre Swift and also Brian Harry. He also had a touchdown at 60 yards. So those two guys combined for over 200 yards total offense to lead the team to victory. Next up, Florida, the Georgia-Florida game. One of the Georgia's biggest rivalry game of the season. The outdoor cocktail, the world's biggest outdoor cocktail party, whatever the hell they call it. One thing about Jake, I give him a lot of credit for. He's never lost to Florida. 3-0. Great. When you're your top rival, kudos to Jake. And this game he did recover. He did play better than he had played in the 2 previous games. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 91 QBR. So he did turn it around, and he played a solid game. No shade. DeAndre had a solid game, 86 yards rushing. The defense played great. This was a very exciting game. Now, Florida, they were playing with being led by a backup quarterback. So I was hoping that the game would not be as close as it was. But once again, when it comes to Georgia and Florida, you can kind of throw the records out because these teams, it's such a huge rivalry game. The games are usually really really close. So no shade there. A good solid victory. Um, Solid play by everyone, including Jake. Next up, Missouri. And Georgia got lucky this season, especially early on. They played against a lot of backup quarterbacks, and this was a shutout as well. They beat Missouri 27-0. A nondescript game. It's just solid. Once again, against a totally inferior team. Missouri is awful. Jake passed 173 yards, 2 touchdowns. His completion percentage was kind of low. His QBR 51, but once again, they're playing against scrubs. So DeAndre rushed for 83 yards. Brian rushed for 42. Just a solid game for the team as a whole, in spite of a less than stellar performance from their quarterback. Next up, Auburn. Another rivalry game. Georgia won that game 21-14. Auburn has a highly touted freshman quarterback by the name of Bo Nix, who played really well. He's an up and coming star. Jake had a I wouldn't say subpar game. He threw for 3 touchdowns, 110 yards. So not a whole lot of yards, but he got the touchdowns when he needed them. DeAndre Swift rushed for 106 yards. Once again, and they actually led 21-0 going into the fourth quarter. The defense gave up 2 late touchdowns, and Georgia eked it out. But Jake played a solid game. Everyone played a solid game. Not spectacular, but a solid game. And that win helped them clinch the SEC East, which guaranteed them a spot in the SEC championship game. Next up, Texas A&M. Georgia won that game 19-13. Once again, against an inferior team. You should never have been that close. And this is the game where DeAndre got pissed off and cussed Jake out because Jake kept sending him and kept making bad calls and checking him into run blitzes. And DeAndre got kind of beat up in this game, and he finally had enough of it because Jake was fucking up a lot in this game. He passed 163 yards, a touchdown, 35 QBR. Not a solid game at all for Jake. Once again, his play just been mediocre after the first 4 games. His play just really, in the mid part of the season, his play was not good at all. It was embarrassing at times. And DeAndre finally had enough. He just cussed his ass out, and that kind of let me know right there that there's no way that DeAndre Swift's coming back for a senior season. You can tell he's had enough. And an unspectacular game. Never should have been as close as it was. Georgia wins 19-13. No thanks to Jake. Next up, Georgia Tech. Another rivalry game. The biggest rivalry game. The in-state rivalry game, should I say, for Georgia. A runaway victory, 52-7. And Georgia Tech's like a high school team. They were awful, just totally awful. And of course, everybody played well. Jake played well, 4 touchdowns, 254 yards. DeAndre rushed for 73. Brian rushed for 46. Just a solid performance against a totally overmatched team. So, take it with a grain of salt. But everyone played well, including Jake. He did play well. And once again, a big game. So anytime you play against your in-state rival, is always a big game, whether or not they're inferior or not. It's always good to beat the brakes off of Georgia Tech, which they did. And next up, we have the LSU Georgia game in the SEC championship. Now Georgia came into this game with one loss against 10 victories. So LSU undefeated, number 2 in the nation. Georgia's number 4 in the nation at the time. And this game was an absolute wipeout. LSU beat the brakes off of Georgia. The game was never really in doubt. And I knew Georgia was going to lose this game. I knew there's no way they're going to win. For one, LSU had been basically ransacking opponents all year long. They have a great quarterback, Joe Burrow, who won the Heisman Trophy, and by far he's the best quarterback in the league. He is the best quarterback in the SEC. Also the best quarterback in the country this year. and Jake just played absolutely awful. A lot of folks made excuses for him. He threw two interceptions against one touchdown, 225 yards. Oops, sorry. Uh, Jake looked like a deer in headlights, and the LSU defense was just relentless. They beat the brakes off of him. Um, just a totally embarrassing performance for the whole team. The defense looked unprepared. The offense definitely looked unprepared. No one played a good game here, which is just totally embarrassing. It was hard to watch, hard to stomach, but I knew they were going to lose this game. They had done everything. Everything was smoke and mirrors after the Notre Dame game. And like I said, they lucked out and played a lot of backup quarterbacks. But LSU, that wasn't no backup quarterback. That was the best quarterback in the country, and he ate them alive. So, so 37-10, a wipeout, season over, season ruined. One more game to go anyway. Georgia did get a berth in the Sugar Bowl, which is, I guess, a consolation prize for them against Baylor. Now, when it comes to the Sugar Bowl, which the Sugar Bowl is one of the most prestigious bowls in college football, but now you have the college playoff, and the college playoff has basically made the bowl games irrelevant. Um, so even though it's the Sugar Bowl, which is a prestigious bowl, nobody really cares. It's to the point where the players don't even want to play. And like last year, Georgia played in the Sugar Bowl, lost to Texas. The players didn't want to play. They already packed it up and were done for the season. And the guys who had pro potential, skipping the game, so on and so forth. And there's a question as to whether or not DeAndre would skip the game, but he did. I think he played a couple series or whatever. But it was clear that he was disinterested. He did show up. He did show up and he did suit up and everything. I guess to save face and everything. But this dude was leaving skid marks out of Athens. The final score was 26-14. Once again, shouldn't have been that close. Baylor's totally overmatched. They're from the what conference they're from? They're from the Big 12 conference, which is notorious for lousy defenses and great offenses and lousy defenses, and Baylor is just nowhere near Georgia's league. And this game should have been a much bigger blowout than it was. Jake played solid, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. Zamir White led the team in rushing with 92 yards and a touchdown. And George Pickens had a great game, 12 receptions, 175 yards and a touchdown. He was named the game's MVP as well. DeAndre only had 1 carry for 2 yards, and that was it. So he just, he'll get a Sugar Bowl ring or whatever. And that's about it. Not a whole lot to say about this game as well. Like I said, I watched it, of course. I was disinterested because I knew it was going to happen. I knew they were going to win. It was never in doubt. And they're my team, so I'm always going to watch them anyway. But still, this game was I was disinterested and just watched it just for nostalgia's sake, if nothing at all. So there you have it. Georgia 12-2 for 2019, and this was a very disappointing season. And like I said before, going into the season, had high hopes. Once again, it's a solid team, very talented team, and I really did believe that they would make it to the championship game, which they did, and meet Alabama again. But no one knew that LSU would be as strong as they were. LSU kind of came out of nowhere. They were solid last year, but nowhere near as good as they were this year. They beat Alabama, it really kind of took the wind out of myself because I want to see Georgia play Alabama again and finally get a chance to beat them. But looking at the way that Jake Fromm played this year, by the time we got to this point in the season anyway, I knew even if they played Alabama, there's no way Georgia's going to win, not with him at quarterback. It just wasn't going to happen. Now, all year long, well, since the Notre Dame game, I've been kind of ragging on Jake a little bit on social media and everything, and talking about how he's mediocre and how his performance has regressed from his freshman season, which it has. The numbers don't lie and your eyes don't lie. He has regressed. And my number one thing with him, as far as my disdain for his play, is the fact that he has not improved, in my opinion, one bit since his freshman year. He's just the same cat, but he's actually regressed from what he was as a freshman. And when you're a junior in college and at an elite program, and people looking at you as an elite player and a possible Heisman candidate, and a first round draft choice, you got to play a whole lot fucking better than you did. You got to. This ain't haterade. This ain't anything like that. You got to play a whole lot better than he played. You know, you get all the glory. The quarterback gets all the glory. The quarterback is the one who gets the wins, but the quarterback is always also the one who gets the loss, and they are the measuring stick for the team. They set the tone for the entire team. Jake Fromm is the tone setter for the University of Georgia as their quarterback, and he set a bad tone. He set a bad tone, and you can tell that the players were not responding to him by the end of the season. DeAndre, like I said, DeAndre rebelled against him. He got called out a little bit for cussing his quarterback out. But DeAndre finally he's like, fuck this, man. You know, you're killing us out here, man. You're not playing well. We're counting on you, and we can't keep, covering up for your mistakes and everything. So people say he was immature for doing that, so on and so forth. I say bullshit. Yeah, I mean, DeAndre, you play your ass off, and you got pro potential, and you don't need your quarterback sending you into run blitzes. You just don't. And you don't need your quarterback out there, throwing bad passes, low and high, and you getting chopped and everything. It's just not a good thing. So I don't blame him for doing that. And that brings me to the elephant in the room, Justin Fields. If you know college football, Justin Fields was starting quarterback for Ohio State University, player of the year in the Big Ten. Threw for 40 touchdowns, 1 interception, led the team to the college playoff, played a great game in the playoff, had his team in position to win, Heisman finalist, just overall great season. And the number one thing about Justin Fields that bothered me the most, drum roll, he was at the University of Georgia. He was the backup quarterback to Jake Fromm last year. And Justin Fields is what they call a dual threat quarterback, which is basically code word for a black quarterback, which is crazy to me because, there are a lot of great white dual threat quarterbacks as well. Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert. There are a lot of, white dual threat quarterbacks as well. But a lot of times they get the tag of pro style quarterback, whereas the black quarterbacks are called dual threat quarterbacks, which is a bunch of bullshit. But I'm not going to even make this shit racial. Okay? Because it shouldn't go there. My beef was Justin was better than Jake. Last year, Justin played in almost every game. He was the number one overall dual threat quarterback in the country coming out of high school. He signs with Georgia, and Kirby had to get him in games because his talent demanded so. And I could see it just in glimpses. He didn't play a whole lot because Jake was the starter. But when he did get on the field, the offense just looked different. There was a pop to the offense. Even though the offense wasn't built around him, he was still green, rough around the edges. He made some bad plays, so on and so forth. But whenever Justin touched the ball, you knew something good had the potential to happen. They either with his feet or with his arm. He has a cannon arm. Fast, elusive. He's like to me, he's like another Deshaun Watson. I call him Deshaun Watson 2.0. That's the type of talent level that he has. And he left Georgia to go to Ohio State, transferred there, and led Ohio State to an undefeated record going into the college playoff. Once again, he by any measure was really the second best quarterback in the entire country. And juxtaposing him against Jake week in and week out, really infuriated me because I, in my heart of hearts, felt that the wrong person was playing quarterback at Georgia. And my feeling was that Jake, for all his pros, his cons outweighed his pros. And like I said, he got exposed because he's very slow. He runs like he has a goddamn piano on his back. And he does not have a strong arm. He doesn't have an NFL level arm, NFL caliber arm. He really doesn't have a college caliber arm. His throws have no zip on him. He cannot throw into a tight window to save his life. Everything has to be optimal for him to succeed with his throws. His mechanics are not solid. If he gets flustered, his mechanics go out the window. His throws sell high or low. He's hanging his receivers out to dry constantly, but everybody's blaming the receivers for Jake being inaccurate. Jake is very accurate when everything goes perfect. But this is football. Things rarely go perfect. It's the defense's job to make things imperfect and to make the quarterback make plays. And when the defense forces Jake to make plays, you're in big ass trouble. You know, and you juxtapose that against Justin. If a play breaks down, he has the ability to turn a bad play, a broken play, into a big play because of his dual threat ability. His ability to throw the ball, to gun the ball, and to also run the ball. And in college football is all about spread offenses now and multi-talented quarterbacks who can do everything. And Jake is one-dimensional. And his one dimension ain't that good. And people say, well, you hating on him, all this kind of stuff. You know, you're being racial and whatever. No, I'm not hating on him. I didn't hate on him last year or the year before that. I just realized something. The cold water got splashed on me, and I just realized something. I realized that Jake Fromm is just not as good as we thought he was. We got conned. They had a great year his freshman year, and it wasn't because of him. You had Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Nicole Hardman and Terry Godwin. They had a lot of nice weapons around him that that basically he managed the game, didn't fuck it up, and I give credit where credit is due. Jake played great as a freshman. He did, but he did not elevate his game proportionally to his hype. In his sophomore year, he leveled off a little bit. Still played solid, but once again, coming into his third year, his talent did not meet the level of his hype, and that's very, very distressing to me. Especially when you got somebody who was on the team now up here at Ohio State kicking ass and taking names. That infuriated me, and I get into our discussions with his fans and all that kind of stuff. And another thing, a lot of folks on social media that I know, so on and so forth, also from the hometown of Warner Robins, and I think their vision of Jake and their analysis of Jake is skewed because he's from the hometown. Me personally, I don't give a shit where you from. I don't give a shit. You're from my house. If you suck, you suck. If you're mediocre, you're mediocre. If you're great, you're great. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna keep it real and say what I think because this is what Lonzo thinks. I'm always gonna say what I think, whether you like it or not. So when it comes to this particular dude, I'm not gonna say he's not talented because he is, and I'm not gonna say he's not a solid player because he is. He's just not the best. And I think, and when it comes to Kirby Smart, when it comes to any coach, when it comes to football, it's the coach's responsibility to put the best 22 players on the field at all times, at every position. Justin was clearly better than Jake. The best 22 players were not on the field for Georgia because player number one, who wears number one, was at Ohio State, and he should have been here at Georgia, and they let him get away. And his performance dwarfed Jake's performance in every measurable possible. He ain't elite. Okay, let's get this straight. Jake Fromm is not elite. He's a solid player. He is not elite. He is not going to make your team better. You can't build around Jake Fromm. He's a game manager at best. Okay, and one of my Facebook friends said that NFL owners salivate over players like Jake Fromm. And yeah, 30 years ago they did. But the age of the slow white guy is dead and gone. If you look at the NFL now, you got Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson. All four of these guys are in the playoffs now, and one of those guys is gonna win the world championship most likely. Lamar Jackson is about to win the MVP. Last year, Pat Mahomes won the MVP. All these guys, they're black, and they're dual threats. They're multi-talented, 5-tool quarterbacks. The day and age of the one-tool quarterback who does one thing great and everything else mediocre is over. It's done. It's done. Okay. Now, if Jake had a cannon arm, I'd give him a shot in the NFL. He don't have a cannon arm, so the one thing that he's supposed to be able to fall back on, he can't fall back on that. He has a noodle arm. Cannot avoid the rush. Has no speed. He's just a sitting target, and he's gonna struggle at the next level. Now, somebody's stupid enough to draft him in the first round. God help you, but he ain't. He's not gonna get drafted in the first round. And once again, this is not haterade. I'm just being honest. Okay, I'm being honest. Okay, the guy is mediocre at best. There's nothing wrong with being mediocre. Okay, he might be a solid backup, somebody you can fall back on if your quarterback blows his knee out. Somebody come in and not fuck things up. That might be Jake. He can hold a clipboard for a few years before he's an analyst on SEC Network or playing for the Idaho Tuskers of the XFL or something. That's where his career is going to go because the day and age of the slow noodle arm quarterback is just over. Sorry if that hurts you. I'm sorry. Good, because you're jading yourself if you think that this kid is going to be a top flight NFL quarterback. He fucking ain't. You know, if you came to dominate in college, what makes you think you're going to dominate? You're going to dominate at the pro level, the way the NFL game is today. How in the hell can you expect anyone to come into the league and dominate and be a number one draft choice, someone you can build a team around when you ain't even the best goddamn quarterback on your team or in your conference? It ain't gonna happen. So to the jaded folks out there who feel that I'm hating on Jake and think that he's gonna be a number one draft choice and that owners that professional owners are salivating over him, I'll see your ass in March. Oh, let me take that back. I won't see your ass in March because he ain't coming out. Why? Why you don't come out? The number one draft choice is going to be Joe Burrow. As far as quarterbacks, Tua, I can't pronounce it like that. Tagovailoa, whatever, however you pronounce his name. Justin Herbert, Jacob Eason, who used to play at Georgia himself, the guy who Jake replaced because he got hurt. All those guys are projected to go ahead of him in the first round. And there ain't that many NFL teams that need quarterbacks, especially to draft them in the first round. There's only like two or three. I think the Chargers need a quarterback. They're probably going to bring in a veteran quarterback. The Bengals need a quarterback. They're going to take Joe Burrow first. The Dolphins need a quarterback. They're going to pick Tua most likely. And Tua just announced today that he's going to come into the draft. And Tua broke his fucking hip. He's a fucking cripple. And he's still rated ahead of Jake Fromm because they know. People know. People who know football, who are objective about it, who don't think that being from Warner Robins is a skill, they know that, unfortunately, one Mr. Jake Fromm is not a first-round NFL caliber talent. He's not someone you can build a team around. He just ain't. He's going to reach his peak in college. That'll be about it. And once again, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on the kid. I'm not hating on the kid. I'm just being objective and giving my opinion based on what I've seen on the film. Okay, I've watched every single game that Jake Fromm has played at the University of Georgia, and it just crystallized to me. I started looking at him more objectively and not as the kid from my hometown playing for my favorite team. I started looking at him like I should have looked at him from the very beginning, and how I look at every other football player in college football. I looked at him as a football player, and I looked at him and I judged him based on his skill, his acumen, and his ability to his projected ability to play at the next level and or to dominate at the college level. And if you look at it that way, and if you are objective, there's nothing about Jake Fromm that is elite. And I've asked his supporters who argue with me on social media, okay, tell me one thing that Jake is elite at. Just one. To this day, no one said a thing. You know why? Because they can't. Because being from Warner Robins is not a skill. Neither is being white. so those two things notwithstanding, unfortunately, one Mr. Jake Fromm is just, he's just a guy. But he's the Georgia quarterback, and I wish him well. Every time he plays, every time Georgia plays, they're my team. Always gonna root for him. Never root against them. Love Georgia Bulldogs. Been a Georgia Bulldog fan, like I said, since 1977, January 1st, 1977. And I'll be a Georgia fan to the day I die. Love that team. Love the program. Love the players. Even love Jake. Play your ass off, Jake. When you come back next year, I pray and hope that you improve your skill set. That you improve your skill set over the summer. You come back with a vengeance and prove everybody wrong. Hey, prove me wrong. I'd be the happiest person in the world to say, yeah, I was wrong that Jake Fromm is a top flight quarterback. Ain't gonna happen, but if it does happen, I'd be the first person to say it. I'd be happy to say it. So What do you think? Are you a Georgia fan? Are you a college football fan? Who do you think is going to win the big game? LSU or Clemson? What do you think about Trevor Lawrence? What do you think about Joe Burrow? Travis Etienne, what do you think about him? The starting tailback for Clemson. Who has a better defense? I think Clemson has a better defense. But LSU has the most explosion. They have a very explosive offense, and they've got some very talented players at receiver, and Joe Burrow is on such a roll as quarterback. So I really look forward to the Clemson LSU game. I hope it's not a blowout on either side. I hope the game doesn't turn out to be a stinker. But it won't. These cats are very, very talented. I look forward to seeing the game. Sorry that Georgia couldn't make it. Really was hoping that they could, but once again, the two most deserving, the two best teams did make it. So, and when it comes to sports, that's all you can really ask for is just to see the two best teams playing for the championship at the very end. So, what do you think about Georgia? What do you think about Georgia's prospects for next year? Should Jake still be the starting quarterback, or should we look at one of the freshmen that's coming in? Should Jake go ahead and just get into the draft this year and get drafted and start cutting them, start collecting them checks? He'll get paid, save your money, and who knows? You could have a long career as a backup. You never know. You never know. And that's good money no matter what. So, what do you think? Tell me what you think about University of Georgia college football as a whole. What do you think about the advent of the dual threat quarterback, i.e., the black quarterback, which is crazy to me. The dual threat quarterback in college football, and how everything has evolved towards these multi-tool players, these athletic players at the most important position. So, once again, University of Georgia, 12-2, Sugar Bowl champions, SEC East champions, solid season, fellas. Disappointing in a lot of respects, but once again, your kids, and I appreciate your efforts. Great watching you, and I'll be screaming and yelling for you next year, and look forward to seeing you again. So there you have it. So hit me up, Twitter at What Lonzo Thinks, Gmail whatlonzothinks@gmail.com. Please subscribe, sign up for notifications. Let me know what you think, because once again, you just heard What Lonzo Thinks. Bye.